Hello and welcome to Identerati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue, and today is episode 72. And our topic today is Introduction to MOSIP or Foundational National Identity. And our guest today is Yodahiza Michael, Executive Director of National ID Ethiopia, and Sasi Ganesan, Head of Engineering of the modular open source identity platform, commonly referred to as MOSIP. Welcome, guys.
Hey, welcome. Good morning, good
Hi,
afternoon, everyone.
everyone.
Before we jump into this topic, I'd just like to take a second to let you guys introduce yourselves. Yodahi, why don't we start with you? How did you find yourself in the digital identity space?
Thanks for inviting me here. Currently I act. I'm the executive director of the Ethiopian Digital ID program. How did I find myself in digital identity? About 2000, I think it's around 2018 that I made a proposition to the government. A new administration came in. I was part of that government, and I proposed that we revamp our digital ID system. We used to call it national ID. Now we call it digital ID to be more in tune. I think when I made that proposal, the rationale or the experience I had was with one city level ID deployment, biometric-based identification for a city level. I was involved in that project, so I was somehow familiar with what biometrics is and what ID can do. But throughout the journey, starting from 2018 until now, obviously my understanding has improved a lot, and what the potential, especially in terms of building the digital economy, the role of ID is very much important, especially in nations like ours where you don't have a good foundational kind of ID system to establish trust for businesses, for government. So yeah, that's how I came into the ID space.
Awesome, thank you. Sasi, how did you find yourself in the identity space?
Okay, so I started from Aadhaar days. So somewhere around 2009, I started working in Aadhaar. For a lot of you who don't know me, I was the chief security architect of Aadhaar. I did that till 2014, and then went on to create a paper that I and Pramod co-authored for e-signatures at the India scale. When we want to serve 1.4 billion people, e-signatures are also very difficult. So I've been doing this work for quite some time, and then moved on to MOSIP, and we said we'll build everything once again in the open source with a lot more learnings and a lot more interactions and community together. So that's my journey over time.
Awesome. Yodahi, I'm going to start with a question for you. Can you tell us about the Ethiopian National ID program? What kind of foundational identity existed before the program? What is the FAIDA digital ID, and how does it improve foundational identity for citizens and help the private sector and the business of government?
Let me start with your last question. eKYC is an important component of any service delivery nowadays. You need to identify your customer online. So that customer could be a citizen. If it's a government service, that customer could be some subscriber. If you're like an online streaming service, so if you're an e-commerce company, that customer is someone that's trying to log in and create a profile so that they interact with your portal, with your platform. So KYC is important, and service delivery in the past used to focus, or ID in the past used to focus mostly on identity fraud and the physical card, etc. Nowadays, it's moving mostly into the online verification and trust space. So yeah, can you tell me a little bit? Can you maybe repeat the questions again?
Sure. Then there was actually three questions pushed into one question, which I have a tendency to do.
I'll note down.
So just in terms of background, what kind of foundational identity existed before you started the program in 2018? Um, and how is the FAIDA ID, national ID, different than what
Right.
existed before?
Right. So prior to 2018, much like it is in the US, we have different states, regional governments. So it's a federal government here in Ethiopia. So each regional government maintains its separate list of civil registration. It also maintains separate list of residential kind of ID. But for the most part, it was paper based, or it's like your county. We call it the Gabali. The county head would be the one in charge of making sure that the residents of that particular county are issued IDs. So two neighboring counties may not necessarily talk to each other. In some cases, in bigger cities like Addis, where I am, the city itself has a digital kind of ID. It's biometric based, but in the past it was not used for authentication. But if you go outside of the borders of that city, obviously that ID is no longer. It could not be a trust anchor. So that's the status we had. And prior to this, our current project, it used to be, like I said earlier, mostly focused on identity fraud and security, and um, ensuring that a person is not going around with two different cards, or they're not creating some kind of fraud using their IDs. That was most of the focus. But Leslie, especially in the past 5-6 years, we're just getting. We understood that it's important to use ID as a service delivery tool, as a form of as a KYC tool. So the philosophy was changing, and obviously the platform that we're using to enable this, for at least for the MIS part, for the management of the ID management system, the IDMS, is MOSIP, which is also built around the same principles. It's not just about enrolling people; it's about authenticating. So that architecture also helped. Our philosophy was aligned. So yeah, that's a change between then and now.
Well, that's a good bridge to my question for Sassy. So we mentioned you were one of the architects of ADHAR, and the white paper actually was really great. It's a great summary of, I think, the history of MOSIP and some of the challenges of MOSIP. Um, but countries were coming to India and saying we could really use something like this ADHAR, but the ADHAR system itself is proprietary. It reminds me a little bit of Kubernetes, where companies wanted the cloud technology from Google, but container, but they couldn't actually open source that. They open sourced Kubernetes. So what kind of systems do you think that countries need to build this foundational identity platform, and how did that line up with the MOSIP components?
Sure. It differs from what traditionally they've used to. But countries have been doing this work for quite some time. Like what Yodaya said, a lot of times specific departments go about doing this as a registration work. In a foundational ID, the basic principle is, can we make sure everybody in the country at least gets one ID? And if you could make sure everybody is covered, or 99% of the people who are in need could cover with an ID, then the other IDs could then add on, or they could just use the same ID for everything. All that is a philosophy that you can talk about later. But the first principle is, can we make sure inclusively provide an ID to everybody? So what do you need in order to make that inclusive principle ready to use? Is the core essence of MOSIP. And as a part of it, biometric becomes an important player because that's universal. It's available mostly for people. There are exceptions. We need to cover them as well. But predominantly, it seems to be available for everybody. And that could be one universal factor that you could take in. And because this is a foundational ID, a lot of services depend on it, the government services. So automatically, some level of uniqueness becomes an important one. Uniqueness is not the mandatory one, but becomes a very important when you do service delivery at a government level, because ghost is a big problem. Duplicates is a big problem because you're spending money on the same people once again, rather than the people for whom the service is needed. At a country scale, visibility is a big problem. So this brings in that deduplication as a very important core layer within the system. So in order to run MOSIP, you definitely, at a national scale, if you wanted a deduplicated model, biometrics would become a must. Well, we do have a demographic one, but it has its limits in terms of at a population scale or at large scales. So biometric becomes an important part. Apart from biometrics, the devices, the systems that you could use to register, they're all important. So that's why if you look at MOSIP, we have done that through an ecosystem wherein you can have a plug and play between multiple choices and multiple vendors. The basic philosophy is, can we not lock ourselves with one vendor? If today I need some hundreds of kits on the field, I should be able to buy from the best buy that I have. And next time I buy, I should be able to again choose a completely different 100 devices and still be able to usable and interoperable within that. The point when MOSIP came in 2018, that was impossible nearly. And that was one of our primary motive, that you kind of give away the vendor lock-in and move into a more interoperable model. We could have gone down the standards path, or you could have gone down implementing a code which is ready to use and test it on the field. So we took the second approach. You can choose either one, and this is where we are. Yeah.
I see. And Yodahi, which components of MOSIP are the most important to your deployment? Which components are you using?
So we're using both the enrollment side, the registration processor, and the package manager, and all of those services. We're also using right now. We're in the process of putting into production the authentication side. We call it the IDA. So the IDA service, which offers technically a kind of a standalone authentication connected to the main registration, the enrollment component or module via an API. So this IDA is also we're currently using. There are some independent other open source projects that's being hosted by the parent institution, IIITB. One of them is eSignet, which is a single sign-on solution. That's it's an open source single sign-on solution. So that one, it connects to the IDA. So that one we're also deploying, and we hope to use it to connect all our relying parties. So essentially, say you are a bank or a local entity, we give you the documentation. You start testing it. We do the integration on the sandbox, and if they successfully integrate with eSignet on sandbox, then we move them to production. So it's a sign-in solution based on this OAuth protocol.
eSignet, did that come out of? It sounds familiar. What country did that come out of? Do you know?
I think it's best if you ask that question to. I don't know which country it came out of.
Yeah. So Sassy, I vaguely heard of this one. Could you do you know what the background is for this eSignet?
Sure. So we in the initial MOSIP releases, there was only concentration of giving an API out. And the reason why we said we want to be very bare metal at an API level rather than doing OpenID Connect, we were trying to target POS terminals wherein you have this PCI compliant devices through which you can actually withdraw money, use those devices as a micro ATM kind of devices in the future. And that has a 2G connection in most of the places that we are looking at. So we wanted very, very simple, primitive, secure, a trusted device which could actually send information and collect it. So that was our first phase, and things went well with that, and we were able to launch our services. But as we proceeded into the target layer, like Philippines did 80 million registration, and then we started to encounter situations where we also want to connect to multiple relying parties, private players, and others as we proceed into that system. And API is, as you know, Mike, it's not a good one because the end user's information has to be collected by the relying party, and we didn't want it to let that, and there are data protection acts that was preventing. And so we said we were in the process of thinking, how do we actually go about it? And then we looked at OpenID Connect, we connected with the team and checked out if we can choose some specific profiles that we are interested in, because we were not interested in generally implementing the OpenID Connect. We were very, very picky about exactly what RFCs and what IETF standards that we would pick up and combine it with OpenID Connect. So it's a very desperate situation to make that work in Philippines. And then we had Cambodia coming on board and then saying us, hey, we are looking at exactly a similar kind of a solution. And that added up a boost into that. And between us and Cambodia, there were a bunch of engineers who worked together. And then we said, okay, why don't we make it like a full-fledged system that could be available for people who are adapting MOSIP to directly use it, or people who already have some form of ID in place. For example, there are countries where physical IDs are issued. They're not in a digital form. The digital department is different. The physical ID issuance department is different. There is no connection between these two departments. So we need to find a way to onboard them quicker and faster and convert them digital so that digitally we can make that solution available. So eSignet was a bridge which lets us do both of this side of the story to make it happen very, very fast. So if you're in a trusted source, you go there API. You are in a place where you work with the typical relying parties, businesses and private companies and others. Continue the eSignet path, and now we have opened up both these parts to be available. So that's a brief history about how.
Is eSignet a MOSIP component then?
Yeah, right now you can think of eSignet as one additional MOSIP component. It can be used individual or you could be used combined, but it's very, very, very limited to a foundational ID focus, and it doesn't have anything other than a foundational ID's needs. It's a very, very bare simple primitive system.
Okay. And Yodahe, what types of authentication do you see your service offering first? Password, biometric, or mobile, or all the above?
With rapid progress in terms of facial recognition and matching, we think the selfie way might be a good way to go, especially smartphone is proliferating and a lot of government applications and other apps are available on your phone. So you'd rather do the authentication, at home on your phone or at your convenience. If we go with the fingerprint route, obviously it's going to be a physical service delivery. For most cases, there are a few initiatives, few technologies out there that let you scan your fingers using a good quality camera on your smartphone. But those are, we at the national ID level, a lot of them have not been deployed. So we're thinking of going mostly with selfie, but for low trust requirements, requirements by the relying party. Right now, we're using OTP, just an SMS OTP.
Okay.
We are also considering this. There's this protocol. It's a cryptographic protocol that most banks and these financial institutions use. That generates like these authenticator apps. There's a protocol behind those authenticator apps that we plan to use to deploy sometime in the future. But right now, we're mostly using OTP.
I see. Yeah, there's HOTP, TOTP, the oath protocol. One thing I'll mention about facial recognition, we had 2 live streams about deep fakes and how AI is getting really effective at basically generating on the fly facial images, even with video. And the best algorithms are only 95% effective at beating deepfakes now. I was sort of taken aback by that. Sassy, I want to dig a little bit deeper into MOSIP. The registration component is broken into 3 different parts. There's a pre-registration part, which I guess is a portal. There's a registration client, which is about I guess, establishing uniqueness. And then there's a registration processor. And maybe I got this wrong. Maybe registration processor establishes a uniqueness, but can you talk a little bit about this architecture? Why did you break what I would consider one process, registration, into these three different parts?
Sure. So registration, the pre-registration is the information gathering that happens before a registration works. So I'll give you some examples of how people use it on the field. The idea of pre-registration, when we initially designed, our focus has been that mostly in the urban world, every country has some part of their cities where people would like to really book an appointment, would walk in. There are people who need a predictable information, and they also want to self-type themselves because data quality and data issues are a big problem when you're going national scale, right? I mean, one small spelling mistake, your bank account doesn't get open, your license.
Yeah, by the way, it took me a month and a half to get an appointment to renew my driver's license here in Texas.
So the idea is the pre-registration is a portal where you could go and register yourself, upload all your information, your proof that you're a valid resident or a citizen or whatever is mandated in that country is, and provide your information yourself firsthand. You type it. All right. This is for people who can type, people who have access to computers, and others. That was the initial design for pre-registration. So pre-registration is not a mandatory one. You could come in, stand in the queue, and then register, or you could go away pre-registration. For example, I come from a village. My mom and dad, they can't use pre-registration computers or anything. Either I would pre-book for them, or they would just go stand in the line and get things registered using an operator. Now, pre-registration is a purely online module because the concentration was urban. But during COVID times, it really changed the game because people can't meet each other, people can't stand in the queues. Philippines did extremely well enough work where they actually took tablets with pre-registration loaded up with certain offline capabilities, and they went home to home and registered people. Which means data quality and certain things would have been upfront collected and verified to a good extent. So the countries really do magic with what we give them. We give a really parameter. Like, for example, Ethiopia, right? They have magic work really on the field because at scale, it's very difficult to operate. And that's what this modularity provides. That is why it needs to be segregated pretty well in there.
Just a quick question about pre-registration. You mentioned that MOSIP is mostly APIs, but pre-registration sounds kind of like it's a website. Is pre-registration a website, or is it just APIs?
So the way it has worked within MOSIP was we always start as API first. We build the API first, and then we realize in order to test our APIs, we have test kits and everything, but we also wanted some experience to be given out so that there's an easy, ready-made reference implementation that's available that people take, and then they can change it to fit their needs. So pre-registration does have certain bare metal user interface that's available, which is predominantly taken by the countries and customized to their needs and their modification. So there is a reference UX code that is given in pre-registration, but the API is purely an MPL license and is kept there. So that's the standard model we operate. We give out the API first, and then finally, when the API is ready and it's ready to consume in a good extent, we also put out a reference UX to show, hey, this is how you could possibly use it. People take it and then rebuild it in whatever way that fits their needs.
Okay.
Some people take it as it is. Some people make a lot of modifications as well. So it's left to the countries and their idea and their thinkings there. So to continue further, so pre-registration works at that level. Then at the registration, you need to cover, as I said, our aim is to cover everybody inclusively. And for example, during my other days and during my Philippines days, we have realized it to a great extent. There are people who walk down with a large set of batteries and laptops and this enrollment kits and everything, and they would vanish for next 20 days. They would have no connectivity. We would not know whether they are alive, they're there, no phone connection, nothing. And it take a mass enrollment at 20 days, no connection to these systems. And then after 20 days, they come out of this place and then really then say, okay, this village is now registered and here is the details of the registration. So this registration is in some way to fancy tell that it's like a ceremony. It's a big function that's happening and everybody's immersed into it. no connectivity in a lot of these places, but we still want to register these people and bring it in because eventually we want to reach them. Eventually, we think the connections will reach them, but it is important for the government to know they exist, and we need to find ways of servicing them. So the registration client is predominantly designed to an offline system, which has a extremely old style, thick client, completely collects all data that is necessary, encrypts it right on the tablet at the time of storing it. A TPM-based tablets is used in primary cases. And then after 20 days, or you can configure that within our system, but it takes 20 days most often, or 5 days in certain cases. That they can come online after 5 days, and then they can upload all the data that they have collected of their residents back into the system. And then the system, in the central system, then which we call it as a registration processor. It's a complete workflow. It's a SATA architecture. It goes to each stages and then finds out if the packet qualifies. We call that as a packet. Every information is collected and converted into a certain format called packet. So these packets come in. Every packet is individual's data. This packet is then decrypted and then validated and verified. And then we send for a uniqueness check. And if everything is okay, eventually an ID is generated and then handed over back to the end user. This is the registration process work. So there is a disconnect that we need to do between the registration processor and the registration client, because to be very inclusive, offline is a must in a way. And you should see some of our pictures. I hope we have put out some of the pictures, but I could share with you some of them. We have long people standing in the queue, mid of the sun is at peak, and people are standing in the shades while waiting for the enrollments to happen for the next one. So it's not an easy journey where you come in and stand there and somebody says, "Sir, you know what? Internet is not working. Oh, you know what? The server is down. Somebody's restarting." It's absolutely inhuman to even design and tell that. So the system is designed to be completely offline, free from everything. It does sync. It does do a lot of things. In a way, it's similar to your apps that you use on your phones, which can do everything that's offline. And when there is an upgrade, then it can get in. Right?
Interesting.
So this still combines it.
Yeah, I had no idea that that it was out of necessity that distinction happened. Yotahi, I want to pivot a little bit towards operation. One of the things that I found really impressive about Ethiopia's operation is that you have done the integration work with your internal team, and you're also operating. I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit about why you chose to use an internal team for this deployment, and what were some of the challenges, not just with deploying MOSIP, but deploying the infrastructure that MOSIP needed to run on, which I think here in the US, almost every government is using public cloud. But in Ethiopia, there is no public cloud. So you actually had to build maybe even from bare metal up. So can you just talk a little bit about some of the, why did you choose to do this work in-house versus getting an integration company? And what have been some of the operational challenges of doing that?
Right. Yeah. By the way, we are also catching up. We now have public government cloud available. We have the state telco offering cloud, a few others. So we're already using these cloud services. But yeah, as you said, it's mostly on premise. So we have to manage everything from network infrastructure related issues, telco related issues, connectivity, DevOps, deployment, and also application layer software. Also have the developers. So, but I mean, we did not decide not to hire an SI firm from the get-go, but when we started testing MOSIP back in 2020, maybe 2021, we're just testing it, seeing what a MOSIP deployment looks like. Does it really meet what we envisage? All of that. So we did not have a very hard deadline put on by the government to enroll these many millions in this many months, etc. So we had the luxury of having a couple of engineers tinkering with it, just doing some kind of lab tests and sandbox deployments of MOSIP, which gave us gave us time to get familiar with the platform and the technologies thereof, And of course, we have almost weekly meetings every week with MOSIP folks. So should we face any challenge, we get support. So we slowly built the team, and the moment we decided to take it to the national scale, we did not see any need to hire a MOSIP specific kind of SI. We have plans right now. We have plans to hire an SI, but mostly as a PaaS, like a platform as a service kind of provider, on-prem PaaS. But other than that, we don't see the point of. We feel like we're familiar enough with MOSIP, and we're building in-house capacity. But in terms of operating and at the same time system integrating, yeah, it's not an easy task. Definitely would have been much easier if we hire an SI, so that we can purely focus on the operations. But right now we're managing to do both. And some of these logistical and operational work we are outsourcing to partners like telcos and banks. So they're the ones going out in the fields and registering. So we can mostly focus on the platform and the deployment.
Right. Yeah, it's actually harder to do what you're doing than I think what we do here in Texas because we have so much more support to do that. Sasi, I wanted to pivot a little bit towards security. As you know, there's this inexorable flow of critical vulnerabilities. Every day I check our list at Glue, and because the supply chain of open source has a constant stream of dependent libraries that become vulnerable. How often does MOSIP release its software to patch these CVEs? And how hard is it for countries that are using MOSIP to keep up with this sort of constant stream of updates that need to be fixed?
Okay. Our releases, so for example, just to give you metrics, I think this year, so far, I think we made a 35 odd releases. So literally 2 or 3 releases goes in a month. Some, because we are modular, we pick and choose what we think is critical and then get that released. While we have been okay in catching up, well, it's not an easy task. I think you've been in the open source, so you know what it takes to get these things sorted out and be ready for a release. It has not been an easy journey, to be very honest, Mike. And once we update, the entire cycle then has to go into a national ID infrastructure. And national ID is in quite countries, it is a very critical infrastructure. It's not going to be easy for them to just take a live stream of updates from us and just dump it in. It's not going to happen. It's going to go through another check of theirs before it could really go in, and they need the necessities and other stuff. So as of now, we have been decent enough in terms of catching up vulnerabilities. The fact that the stacks that we have been using has not been in a disastrous situation so far has helped us, but I don't think that's going to continue. We have been urging countries to go ahead and update, but it is a journey. It takes time. The countries have to catch up. As Yoda said, there is a lot more challenging than that for them because the infrastructure is run by them. There are infrastructure-related work as well that has to be ready. So it's a difficult one. From MOSIP side, we are okay. I'm not saying we're great. We are okay. We are able to detect, thanks to GitHub and a lot of other open source tools that are available. There are people who have given us free of cost, even though it's a commercial tool. They have given us free because we are a non-profit right now, and they've been grateful enough and helping us out. So tons of help is available. We are able to get better, but the same thing with the countries is not an easy one, and that's a challenge that we should solve it eventually. But right now, I don't think that's a challenge that is easily solved. They pick and choose. We send them advisories. They pick and choose, and then they do an update. If it was in a very bad situation, then we really get on a call with them. Otherwise, we have been just sending them advisories and hoping the best to be done.
Yeah. But by the way, at Janssen Project, we also have a number of components, and we went to a mono repo with one release because we found that individually releasing components can create QA cross dependencies, and what version of this works with what version of that. It starts to get complicated. and we decided that we're just going to move to a mono repo and do single releases. That was a decision that happened after like a decade, though, to be honest.
Okay.
But Yoda, maybe you could comment on the update cycle. You mentioned that you were looking for perhaps a PaaS, a platform as a service company, to come in and operate MOSIP. Has updates been one of those challenges? And what's your experience? 35 updates would drive any enterprise customer absolutely crazy. Having to re-QA 35 times a year would probably be very difficult. What's the experience as the end customer been of the upgrade and patch process for MOSIP?
We've done a couple of updates in the past, a few major ones, and definitely a lot of patches. Because sometimes we're also beta testing together with the MOSIP team. So if we find some error, they fix it on the go and send us a patch, and we apply it. So yeah, that being said, the update cycle, for instance, there is a big update that it's called the LTS, the long-term support version, that we've not yet made because everything is changed in the LTS version, new architecture, new schema, everything is changed. So it's going to be a lot more costlier for us to upgrade, because right now we have more than 10 million people with digital ID on our platform. So we're being very extremely cautious. Yes, our folks they get the entire new LTS training. The MOSIP team, we've done a sandbox deployment of the LTS, but really moving there, because there are a lot of moving pieces. We're taking our time. And also, the good thing about a modular system is that we can, for instance, we have already migrated the authentication side to the LTS, but the enrollment side, which is where the bulk of our data is, we're taking time to do it. Some of the limitations, as you guys both pointed out, is the infrastructure related, but it's mostly DevOps. With this PaaS provider, what we're planning to do is we're not planning to. The PaaS provider essentially it could be anyone. It's mostly focused on Kubernetes and databases, Postgre. The platforms are non-MOSIP platforms that we're focusing on, or MinIO for the object store, but nothing for the MOSIP. For the MOSIP side, application side, we're managing ourselves.
Okay, I want to actually pivot a little bit to the future. Sassy, looking ahead, what are some of the more important features that you see? Like, where's the R&D investment happening in MOSIP now for new capabilities?
So right now there is a big migration work happening in Java 20 to Java 21. We think that could help us a little bit in optimizing compute.
By the way, those are the most thankless upgrades, because you're not actually getting anything new. You're just going to the latest version. So as a Java user ourselves, I commiserate with this.
It's a painful
But other
explanation.
than Java updates, what are some of the cool? Nobody likes, the customer doesn't get anything out of Java updates. What are some of the new features or capabilities you're prioritizing?
The newest one that's coming in is a new stack called Inji. While we have this online version of verification and other stuff through a centralized model, we have also been embraced with decentralization for quite a long time. Because in India as well, centralization has worked to a great extent, but centralization is not the answer for everything that we wanted. Well, it's a good start to begin when you have nothing. But it would also be nice if we could offer decentralization right from the out. So idea is, if you could register once centrally, because uniqueness becomes an important part of the story and inclusiveness becomes an important story. But after that, if you could issue cards, which could be digital in nature, which could be like a W3C standard or MDoc or SD chart or something, we could then move them into a mobile or into a paper or into a cloud wallet, and use that for further verification. Would be an extremely interesting concept. This also allows us not just in the identity domain, but could also expand it to tell your licenses, your degree certificates, and literally everything can slowly move in. So to demonstrate this as a proof of concept and to provide the basic necessity toolkits what MOSIP has done right now is we have built a full stack for credentialing called as INGI. That's the latest. There are some experiments going on with countries. We're working with Yoda here as well to see if we can take some part of other components and then plug it into the existing work that Yoda and his team has done. A very amazing mobile application. We want to see if we can plug in some of these components and then make it interoperable. So as the government continue to progress the digital side, more and more can come in, and it allows lesser friction within the system. Anybody who wants extremely high assurance can go online and authenticate into the system. Quite a lot of decentralization can help in the other forms. So we think decentralization is a big work. Right now, our biggest focus, our biggest bet most of our engineers are working on is this decentralization. It has been making some strides, and we have some more to go. Probably another 6 months, we would be pretty nice in figuring out everything that we need, because privacy is one big concern that we are worried about. When you go digital at national scale, you don't want to have a situation where everybody knows everybody's data, and then it becomes very difficult to advocate on privacy. So there are some things that we are working with the W3C team to address some of the pseudonyms and other things that are needed. There's a lot of interesting work that they're doing as well. Kim has been helping us great. We are also working with Thorsten and the team on the SD charts and others to pick it up. So those are the works that we want to catch up. And when that catches up, that's going to be one of our biggest improvement that we could showcase on the field. And hopefully that will cover most of the inclusivity and usability in a far more effective way.
I'm glad you mentioned wallets. I had that on my list of questions, of which I've only gotten to about 10% of. So maybe we'll have to follow up on that one. I'm also glad you mentioned privacy. I also had several questions on privacy, which I'm not going to be able to get to either. But Yodahi, I want to give you the last question before we go to last thoughts. So as a product manager, we always think of all these great features that we want to build for our customers, but actually the only important features that are actually need to be built are when the customer actually says, wouldn't it be great if blank? So I heard Sassy's priority on digital wallets. I think that's a common theme with a lot of identity experts. But from your customer perspective, what do you see some of the features that it would be great if MOSIP had going forward? What do you think their priorities should be?
I would say two. One is 2D barcode, QR-based offline authentication that that can store some kind of biometrics inside, and that offers you a good level of trust, a good level of assurance offline. That would be good, because the customer may not always carry a smartphone, so a digital wallet, yes, it's good, but it may have limitations in rural areas, for farmers, for people without smartphones. So 2D barcode, a printable credential, but that gives you a good level of assurance. Yes, we're working on it. A lot of people are working on it. Some of the challenge there would be what can you put? What's the payload on the QR code? How much can you compress the face and the other biometrics? So if those challenges were worked on, maybe a better compression algorithm or a good 2D barcode solution would be a very good thing to have. Even the digital wallets, they can also use this 2D barcode, because not everything needs to be transmitted via Bluetooth or online. You can do offline authentication using smartphone. The second one would be an ABIS solution. ABIS is the most expensive part of the software licensing scheme that we have to procure right now to ensure uniqueness. The solution out there are a lot of open source solutions that are not necessarily scalable, but that can do a good level of templatization and matching, etc. But if you were to work on if MOSIP, SASI, and Fox, if you were to work on open source ABIS, that would also really help, because imagine there are some 196 countries. Not all of them have uniqueness ensured or biometric-based IDs. But this ABIS solution would not only serve national governments, but it would also serve subnational governments, enterprises, etc. But with all this advancement in AI and neural networks, I think it's about time that we have some kind of a workable open source solution for ABIS as well.
So let's go to last thoughts. Sasi, we'll start with you. We'll give Yodhei the last thoughts. Anything? Oops, no, wrong one. Let me get you up there. Anything you want the audience to think about? Closing thoughts?
Oh, sure. I think we have been advocating on the offline models and offline way of verifications to a great extent, while we are influencing much of the thinking within the standards body right now. But I would urge anybody who is working on standards and toolkits. While online is great, there is no doubt a lot of us are online today, every day. But remember, still more than 60% of the people across the globe are offline. They do not have access to internet and technology as much as you have. And it is essential that we continue to build a world where they're not left out. And it's important that when we build solutions, we also think solutions or standards, we also think if we could make that life a little more better by introducing things, or at least not restricting the newer way of thinking. So all I request is if you are working on standards or any open source toolkits and technologies, which could be enhanced to do something offline, please don't hesitate. Put in your code, put in things, shout out to us. We will try and see how well we can take it up and pick it up and use. We are still a very, very small team, trying to do as much as we could as we do. And thanks for listening, and please visit the GitHub MOSIP repo and GitHub. You can also visit our community.mosip.io. You're more than welcome there, and help us contribute your work. Thank you.
Awesome. And Yodhei, we're going to give you the last thoughts. Anything you'd like the audience to think about?
Maybe a last thought would be there is a lot of emphasis being given to privacy. In Ethiopia, for instance, we just recently enacted the personal data protection law. It's a very good thing that we have all of these legal safeguards to ensure privacy. And if you look at MOSIP, it's the whole philosophy, the architecture is built around privacy. A lot of encryption happens in storage, in flight. Everything is secure and super, making sure that the personal data is always protected. But also equal emphasis need to be given to convenience and access to services, because in countries like ours, where the rate of inclusion is low, whether it's financial inclusion, access to credit, access to any kind of digital, anything that requires trust online, there's very limited services and products that are out there to offer to citizens because of lack of established trust or lack of a trust anchor. When we think about privacy, we also have to think about convenience and functionality. What are we really giving to our customer? Are we just taking their data and then just putting it in a store, making sure it's untouchable, or it's very inconvenient to do authentication? One way to go about it is what Sasi mentioned, the decentralized way of authentication. But last words is that we just have to balance convenience and service delivery with privacy and focus on data protection. So that important balance to make.
Right. I think that's well said. And we don't have time to go into privacy. We need a whole nother episode for that. I did have a number of questions about that, but it's important to remember that foundational identity can include information like ethnicity or religion, and that privacy problems can exist not only with the with, let's say, fraudsters, but also with the government itself misusing this data. I thought the MOSIP white paper did a nice job addressing this issue, because the privacy implications of these foundational identity systems go deep, and the data can be misused by third parties, but also there need to be protections in the systems itself. And that ends up relying on the governments and the implementation of the laws and the protections built into the system, not just the technology. So it's not just a technology, it's like sort of a tools and a rules challenge. But yeah, I think I wanted to go into that direction. We just didn't have time, but I think it is one of the most important considerations for these types of foundational identity systems. And we didn't get it right here in the U.S. And now we ended up paying a big price with overuse of correlatable identifiers like the Social Security number. So yeah, there's a lot of issues there to go into, but I think that that's a good place to end with sort of a just a pin in the idea that the designers of these systems, both technical and business, need to really think deeply about what are the implications of these systems and what are the trade-offs. You can save money, but you also reduce privacy, and so these are tough trade-offs sometimes to make. But okay, well, we covered as much as we could. We went to 50 minutes, which is our 5 minutes over mark maximum. So I'll stop there. Thank you, Sassy. Thank you, Yodahei, for joining us. I just want to remind everyone, hit subscribe
Mike.
on Identirati office hours. We need to get to 1,000. We still need like 200 or so users. So please go to the Identirati office hours LinkedIn page, hit follow. Next week, we're going to have one of the most fun talks that of the year on authorization. It'll be the A to Z of authorization. Literally, we're going to have one letter for each English character, and we're going to talk about authorization. So please join us. Thanks again to the guests, and thanks, audience.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for having us.
Bye-bye, Mike. Thank you so much.